Hello, and welcome to another episode of the IBMS podcast. I'm Rob Dabrowski, the editor of the Biomedical Science magazine, and in this instalment, I'm joined by Martyna Matuszyk from Alzheimer Society. Ahead of Dementia Action Week, which takes place on the 19th to the 25th of May, we had a discussion covering research, diagnostics, treatment, genetic and environmental factors, and much, much more. I hope you enjoy the episode. Hello, Martyna, and thank you so much for joining us today.
Thank you for having me.
Pleasure. Let's kick off by, why don't you tell us a little bit about who you are, your background, and your role?
Yes, so my name is Martyna. I'm a Research Communications Officer at Alzheimer Society currently. And before this, I was doing my PhD at Sheffield University, looking into specific role of astrocyte brain cells and amyloid beta protein in dementia. And then I moved on to be a postdoc working on preclinical trial and drug discovery in motor neuron disease. And then I moved to Alzheimer Society.
Brilliant. And what made you kind of choose the path that you've chosen, because it's a communications type path as opposed to a kind of clinical research path, or is it a bit of both? How does it work?
Yeah, so what drove me into Alzheimer Society and to research comms was my PhD, actually. So my PhD was funded by Alzheimer Society, and not being biased here whatsoever, or trying not to be, they were very, very supportive. So I had a really good relationship with my research network volunteers who were monitoring my project. I loved working for Alzheimer's Society and for my group. I loved dementia, I loved the brain. But what I quickly realized, especially during my postdoc, is what I liked about my research was talking about my research and talking about science and really going to events like Pint of Science, talking at memory cafes about research and really connecting with different audiences about research. And so that led me to a path that I'm on now where I'm a research comms officer. And it's a really rewarding job. I love it.
Brilliant. So that's a good opportunity for me to say, can you explain a bit more about your PhD project and what it involved, what you were looking into, and kind of what the outcomes were?
Yeah, of course. So my PhD project looked at the amyloid beta protein. So this is a protein or one of the proteins that builds up in the brains of people living with Alzheimer's disease, and it causes the brain cells to kind of get sick and die and causes the brain to be a toxic environment. But amyloid protein as a whole is a very fascinating protein. So it builds up in the brains of people with Alzheimer's disease in a similar way to kind of Lego. I would like it to that. So, for example, we start off with smaller building blocks called monomers, and these over time get stuck to each other that form smaller building blocks, so oligomers, so small clumps that are there in the brain and cause all sorts of toxic events. And these can then stick together even further to become larger fibrils. And so what research at the time didn't really understand was whether oligomers and fibrils act in a similar way on the brain cells, and especially on astrocytes, which are a star-like shaped brain cells in the brain. And they are really like a helper cell to the nerve cells. So they help them with communication. They help them with mopping up some of the toxic waste products. And they really keep the nerve cells alive, amongst other cells, obviously. But the astrocytes are very important. So we weren't really sure on how astrocytes interact with this amyloid beta protein, especially the smaller oligomers or the larger fibrils. So during my PhD, we made some synthetic form of amyloid beta on the lab bench, and we made some oligomers and fibrils, which we then used on brain cells, on astrocytes, to really find out what is the difference in how they react to different types of proteins. We found that some of the proteins that are expressed in astrocytes were changing. So things like the blood-brain barrier proteins and some of the inflammation. But that was very preliminary research. So more research would need to happen for us to fully understand the full story there. But yeah, that was in a nutshell my PhD.
Oh, brilliant. Well, when you're researching these things, obviously, if say we're in a clinical setting and someone's come in and they think there might be a cancer, you can do blood tests, you can do biopsies. Obviously, with something like dementia, Alzheimer's, we can't go in and kind of take a little slice out of the brain and have a look at what's going on. How tricky is that, and how do you get around that problem?
Yeah, so diagnosis in dementia is very tricky. Dementia as a whole is not a single disease, but multiple different symptoms. So differentiating between diseases that cause dementia can be difficult and can be tricky. So at the moment, what people can do to diagnose dementia and different types of dementia is firstly through recognizing the symptoms themselves. They might go to their healthcare provider and say, look, I'm worried about these symptoms, or I'm worried about the symptoms of a loved one. And they might get something called a memory assessment, where they will go through a pen and paper assessment, checking their memory, thinking abilities, and functions. Then from there, they might get referred to a specialist for either a spine tap, so that will be looking at specific proteins that are released into your spinal fluid that might indicate a certain form of dementia, such as Alzheimer's disease, or might get referred to make a brain imaging scan, such as an MRI. But what we need to understand is the majority, or a lot of people living with dementia, will not get a formal diagnosis of dementia. It is difficult to get a diagnosis, and it often takes a long time to get a diagnosis. This is a really huge problem that needs to be addressed. So at the moment, there is a huge work going into looking at blood biomarkers as a diagnosis of dementia. So this is where people and researchers are looking into blood tests and how these could be used to diagnose dementias and different types of dementias. And you might have heard of something called a blood biomarker challenge that the Alzheimer's Society, amongst other partners, are involved with. And these are two research groups, who are looking at bringing those blood tests to life in a real-life UK healthcare setting, so that we can diagnose dementia less invasively and quicker.
So is there a kind of gold standard for clinical tests at the moment? After someone's been through and they've done the memory test and it's suspected they've got Alzheimer's or dementia, does it always follow the same route at present?
No. Unfortunately, it is very difficult. The landscape is very complicated. People may have different resources based on where they are living at the moment. So some maybe rural areas of the UK might not be very accessible to go to specialised MRI scanning facilities. So things like that might be a barrier for people to get a diagnosis, and also awareness as well of dementia as not being a part of normal aging. That can be a barrier to diagnosis as well. So a route to diagnosis can be different for many different people and many different communities as well. And the tests are being developed as well. So there is not a gold standard, like you get one test and you have this type of dementia. A lot of the time you might not be offered a test, unfortunately. a lot of the time, you might have suspected dementia, but not get told which type of dementia you have. And it really does depend on what facilities and what is accessible to you at any given moment. And a lot of people that we hear push for this diagnosis and really want to get a diagnosis. And this is really important because that opens up doors to support and care that they might need in the future and planning for the future. But the MRIs, PET scanning, and also the spinal tap and the memory assessment would be the route that usually people take in. And it depends which one is available and which one is applicable to the person seeking diagnosis.
Brilliant. And quite often in conversations, you hear dementia and Alzheimer's used interchangeably, which I think I did a minute ago, which makes me think, oh God, what am I doing? But could you just explain a little bit about the difference between the two, please?
Yes, of course. So dementia is more of an umbrella term of a group of symptoms that could be things like memory problems, thinking problems, planning, some executive function, so your everyday life. All of those can be affected by dementia, and those dementia symptoms can manifest themselves in many different types of diseases, such as vascular dementia, dementia with Lewy bodies, or Alzheimer's disease. Alzheimer's disease is the most common type of dementia, and it has a very different cause to something like a frontotemporal dementia or dementia with Lewy bodies, for example. So in Alzheimer's disease specifically, there is a buildup of two main proteins called tau and amyloid beta. And the buildup of this protein can cause a cascade of events in your brain that leads to the brain cells dying and some parts of your brain shrinking that usually mean that your memory is affected, because this is the part of the brain that is affected first. In different types of dementia, such as frontotemporal dementia, different parts of the brain can be affected, and the cause of frontotemporal dementia can also be different, as well as vascular dementia has a different cause. And so depending on where in the brain you have those changes, that means that it can manifest with different symptoms, but the symptoms can overlap and cause dementia as a syndrome, if that makes sense.
Yes, definitely. And the buildup of tau proteins, is that the cause, or is that a symptom of something else?
So the buildup of tau protein and also amyloid beta protein is thought to be one of the causes of Alzheimer's disease. What we need to understand is we don't understand these diseases fully. So there might be other things that are happening in the brain at the same time that could be a cause or an effect of these proteins building up in the brain. So, for example, we know that inflammation in the brain is tightly linked to these proteins building up in the brain, and that can have a knock-on effect on different parts of the brain, different cells in the brain, which can cause many different negative effects. So these are the proteins that are thought to be the starting point of the diseases. However, as we understand and research these diseases more, and especially Alzheimer's disease and other types of dementia, then we can understand the causes a little bit more. But what we do understand is the buildup of amyloid protein and tau protein happens a lot sooner than the symptoms of the disease. So you can have the buildup of tau and buildup of amyloid years and years before your symptoms actually manifest on the outside. So years before any symptoms like memory loss is detected. So that gives us an idea that those proteins are really, really important in starting the cause and effect and the knock-on effect in the brain that can lead to dementia.
And is there a way, in many diseases, there are forms of screening where you get to a certain age and you're automatically referred for a test to see whether you might have a certain condition or disease? Is anything like that possible currently, or is it likely to be possible for Alzheimer's?
So at the moment, we still don't know whether blood tests for diagnosing dementia are possible in the UK healthcare real life setting. And this is where things like blood biomarker challenge come to play, and things like the emphasis on diagnosis comes to play a lot. So maybe in the future there might be a way, but at the moment, because the diagnosis is so difficult, we need to focus at diagnosing dementia first. Screening is a little bit difficult because we don't know every time if people who have build-up of amyloid will develop dementia in the future and when. So there might be different factors that contribute to you developing dementia in the future. And also it's not applicable to different forms of dementia, such as frontotemporal dementia or vascular dementia, which may not have the specific buildups of protein that we could screen for before the symptoms appear. There are different risk factors of dementia, different types of dementia, and there might be different genetic causes, genetic risk factors that could contribute to a person developing dementia in the future. So at the moment, we don't have a way of screening or pre-screening people who are at risk of developing dementia, other than looking at your risk factors and keeping a healthy lifestyle in a way to prevent dementia from developing in the future, if that makes sense.
With risk factors, do we know how much of it is environmental and how much of it is genetic at the moment?
Yes, so there are genetic forms of different types of dementia, and there are different. And these usually, when you have a genetic cause of dementia, so a family link, a strong family link of dementia, you are much more likely to develop dementia later on. There are certain mutations in your genes that are known to be causative of dementias, including Alzheimer's disease. And these usually manifest themselves as a young onset dementia. So there is a strong genetic link for some of the genes. However, a lot of dementias, we don't know why they happen, and they could happen to anybody, but there are risk factors of dementia, and I think there are 14 modifiable risk factors that can happen, and they all have an accumulative effect. So we know from the Lancet Commission, that was part funded by Alzheimer's Society, that 45% of dementia cases could potentially be modifiable. That doesn't mean that if you do all of these things, you will definitely not get dementia, or if in the opposite way, if you do these things, you will get dementia, but the risk is there and is modifiable. So things like less education in early life, or high cholesterol at midlife, depression, physical inactivity and diabetes, and then social isolation, vision loss, and air pollution, they can all contribute in some sort of a percentage to your risk of developing dementia later on in life. But they are not causative of dementia.
And it may be a stupid question, Martyna, but I've heard people say, I do a Sudoku every day. That kind of exercising my brain will help. Is that true, or is that a myth?
Well, we don't know for sure how brain exercising is modifiable for your risk of developing dementia, but keeping your brain occupied is definitely a good step to keeping your brain healthy. You have to think about the more connections you have within your brain, the more you learn, and we know that less education at early life is one of the risk factors for dementia later on. So the more you learn, the more plastic and more connections you're going to form in your brain, which are only going to help you later on.
And as someone who's working with this every single day and is aware of all the various risk factors, environmental factors that can have an impact, Are you constantly thinking about it as you go about your daily life and what you do? Does it affect the way you behave, having that kind of knowledge?
I would say that I do try to be healthier, and what is good for the heart is good for the brain. So I do exercise and try to look at those risk factors in everyday life and see what I could do, what are my daily habits that I could do and improve on to make myself a little bit healthier. But this is, I think, how people generally are when they look at their everyday activity, or go for a daily walk, or eat a little bit healthier diet, things like that are just daily habits. I don't think that dementia and my risk of developing dementia in the future really clouds my mind a lot. I see that dementia is a devastating condition, and I'm aware of it, and I work with it every day, and we really want to beat this disease, and research will beat dementia in the future. But my everyday life is not being clouded by any potential risk in the future. As long as I keep healthy, I have faith that everything is going to be okay. And the new treatments, the new prevention strategies, the new trials that are coming out, keeping me very hopeful for the future. That one day we will have some really good means of managing this disease.
Do you know what type of percentage of the population will be affected by Alzheimer's in their lifetime, and whether that's something that's going up at the moment or down, or if it's plateaued?
Yes. So around 1 million people are living with dementia in the UK, and more than a third do not have a formal diagnosis. And 1 in 3 people born in the UK today will develop dementia in their lifetime. So we see that the global statistics and the UK statistics see an increase in dementia in the future. So this is a very pressing matter, a very pressing disease that we need to tackle, and we need to tackle right now.
Do you know, and I'm not sure if you know the answer to this, or if there is an answer to this, whether a future increase in dementia is just driven by an increasingly aging population, or if it's likely to be some environmental factors about the way we live our lives that mean there'll be an increase in dementia?
I think it might be, and I'm not a epidemiologist by any means, but I think it might be maybe a case of both and more. So we know that there are risk factors that are modifiable, such as diabetes, obesity, air pollution, and these. If we see a rise in these cases, we might see a rise in dementia cases or dementia risk in the future. As you get older, so your age is also a risk factor for dementia. So as you get older, you are more likely to develop dementia, but dementia is not a part of normal aging. So as we see a more aging population and more people reaching the ages of 65 and older, we might see more cases of dementia. However, there might be different causes, and there are different causes other than aging. And also, we need to look at the global statistics and look at the awareness of dementia. We know that maybe 50 years ago, we might have not seen as many dementia diagnoses as we see now. And this is all to do with the advancement in diagnostic pathways that we see and we will see. And this is a really important and good thing that we see the diagnosis, because that unlocks the doors to support and care that people might need. Whereas maybe dementia would have been seen more as a taboo thing in the past. And we want to shift this perspective of not getting diagnosis to getting diagnosis, and making sure that people have all the options and opportunities to participate in research, to access the care and support that they need in the future, so that they are not left alone with this devastating disease.
Nice, a nice little segue for us to go back into the Alzheimer's Society, with you talking about people's understanding of Alzheimer's and kind of communication around it. What does the Alzheimer's Society actually do, Martina?
We have many different work streams. So, for example, we fund research, we fund innovation so that we help people now and in the future. So we help to understand the disease a little bit better and develop the ways to cure and prevent the disease, and also help people live their everyday life more independently and have more care options. We partner with a lot of other charities such as Alzheimer's Research UK and People Postcode Lottery to deliver research initiatives like Blood Biomarker Challenge, to allow diagnosis to be a better, more accessible way of diagnosing dementia. We are actively campaigning and connecting with policymakers and politicians to advocate for people living with dementia and people affected by dementia, to make those real changes to how dementia is seen, diagnosed and viewed by the society and by the policymakers, so that everybody, so we can end the devastation caused by dementia. We are also delivering support services. So we have our dementia advisors, our support line that people can access, our online forums that people can access as well for more help, support and information about dementia and about what they can be eligible for when they are planning for the future once they have a diagnosis, or if they are seeking to get a diagnosis. And this year, Alzheimer's Society is running a Dementia Action Week, which takes place between the 19th and 25th of May. And the theme of this week is diagnosis. And we are encouraging people who are worried about themselves or their loved ones to use the Alzheimer's Society Dementia Symptom Checklist and seek help. So we will be sharing stories of people with lived experience with dementia to highlight the most common symptoms and different types of dementia. And we're really using this as a campaign to bring to light new treatments and developments on the horizon and what support is available for people affected by dementia.
Can you tell us a little bit about that dimension? Sorry, the checklist, the dementia checklist, and kind of for people listening who have maybe got relatives who they think might be affected, or they might be infected themselves. Is this something you can just sit at home and go through and think, there's a chance I have this, I'll now seek further support?
Yes, so Alzheimer's Society's website has a checklist to help you make a note of symptoms before you talk to your GP. And I think the website link is alzheimers.org.uk/checklist. And this is really to help with an early and accurate diagnosis, to open the door to support care and treatment. And so you can sit at home and open up this website and go through and record your symptoms or symptoms of a loved one, and really facilitate these conversations with your healthcare provider to help you get a diagnosis. Getting a diagnosis can be a daunting experience, but Alzheimer's Society believes it's better to know, as 97% of people affected by dementia tell us that they saw a benefit in getting a diagnosis. So if you are worried about a loved one or yourself, it may be beneficial to remind them that memory issues don't always point towards dementia. But if you are worried about your symptoms and you want to speak to someone, we do have a support line as well. And you can contact and speak to our expert dementia advisors who can provide more advice on the symptom checklist as well. So the support line is 0333 150 3456.
Well done remembering that. And obviously across the country, we've got kind of the NHS landscape is massively different. Things function in different ways in different areas. Is there a typical time frame, and this might not be the right question for you, Martina, but is there a typical time frame from someone contacting their GP with, suspicions that they might be affected to having a diagnosis? Is that something that takes months, years, or is it just dependent on a case-by-case basis?
I think it depends on a case-by-case basis. It depends, as you said, on where people are living, who they are seeing, and how they are interacting with their healthcare providers and their loved ones to seek a dementia diagnosis. We do know that a lot of people in the UK do not have a diagnosis. As more than a third people do not have a formal diagnosis. The dementia diagnosis is, as I said, really, really, really important. And we need fast and cheap and non-invasive ways to diagnose dementia. So simple blood tests could detect Alzheimer's disease and other types of dementia, and they are just around the corner. So I really would urge anybody who's worried about their symptoms or symptoms of a loved one to seek a diagnosis and to push for a diagnosis. And if you do contact the Alzheimer's Society and our advisors, we can help you with the advice on how to get that diagnosis and what the steps that needed to get that diagnosis for yourself or for your loved one.
I would say on almost a daily basis, I get some kind of press release or see something in a kind of science repository where it's about new advances in Alzheimer's, and you quite often get people saying this particular test will get you some kind of diagnosis earlier than this one. And there seems to be a kind of real fruition of work around Alzheimer's at the moment. How kind of involved in that work is the Alzheimer's Society? And why do you think there is such... It seems like an increase to me. It might not be. It might be there's always been a steady amount of Alzheimer's research. I just haven't been privy to it. But is there an increase in the amount of work in this area? And how involved is the Alzheimer's Society in this research?
Yes, we funded over £100 million worth of research to date. And research funded by Alzheimer's Society over 30 years ago and led by Professor John Hardy has resulted in the drugs being approved in the UK. Even though it's privately and not on the NHS at the moment, we saw the 2 new disease-modifying treatments that have been shown to slow the progression of Alzheimer's disease, which are currently going through approval processes. And you might have heard about them. They are called lecanemab and donanemab. So these first-generation drugs are a defining moment in the fight against dementia, and they will help to ensure those living with early stage Alzheimer's disease, and they will make sure that we are one step closer to living in a world where dementia no longer devastates lives. I mentioned before, we also part-funded the Blood Biomarker Challenge, which is a multi-million-pound initiative that is looking to gather the information needed to introduce the blood tests for Alzheimer's disease and other types of dementia into the UK healthcare systems within the next 5 years. We also have a lot more research that we fund into the causes, the cures and the treatments of dementia. That will help the researchers in the research field understand the diseases a little bit more and develop new targets and new treatment and new care options for dementias so that people can benefit now and in the future. So I think the field is moving along, and we see those milestone moments like the disease-modifying treatment being approved in the UK to fruition, but we need more. We know research is important. Research will beat dementia. We need more people participating in research. We need more investment in research, and we really need research to be embedded as a standard way of practice when people are diagnosed with dementia in the UK. So I think research is moving along, and it is the hope for the future. But we need to make sure that we don't lose that momentum.
And the Blood Biomarker Challenge has come up a few times.
Yes.
It kind of almost sounds like a call to arms for researchers and scientists. Can you tell us a bit more about what that is and how it works?
Yes, so we have two brilliant research teams working on the blood biomarkers. So, for those who don't know, the blood biomarkers are signs of disease. And that could be biomarkers can be any disease, such as fever is a biomarker for an infection, or if you get a blood test for your iron levels, that is a biomarker for anemia, for example. So in the same vein, we are trying to develop blood biomarkers for dementia and different types of dementia. So we have two fantastic research teams working on different avenues. So the tau protein can be used as a biomarker, and a specific type of tau protein is called p-tau 217, is one of the protein variants that can be detected in the blood of people with Alzheimer's disease to diagnose them and to make sure that the disease is present. And also we have more and different blood biomarkers that could be potential, but we don't know how these blood biomarkers and these blood tests really work in real life settings. So what Blood Biomarker Challenge does is it will go into clinics and will look for participants who might want to take part in these studies. And they will be looking at their blood and protein levels in their blood and seeing how does it work in a real life setting. Whether can we develop a blood test, a simple blood test to diagnose dementia in the future, and can we differentiate between the different types of dementia, how sensitive these blood tests are, how informative these blood tests are, and the Blood Biomarker Challenge aims to revolutionise dementia diagnosis in the UK, and it will help us to inform our UK healthcare systems into what blood tests could be available and could be beneficial for people seeking a diagnosis.
With treatment, you mentioned those two new drugs. Sorry, I can't remember the names off the top of my head. But how effective are they? I imagine there's been, or I've seen a fair bit of kind of research around them in clinical papers. Is there any indication of how effective they are, and if there is one that is better than the other?
So these treatments, lecanemab and donanemab, are only approved for people living with early stages of Alzheimer's disease. So they will not be helpful for any other types of dementia or people at later stages of Alzheimer's disease. And what we need to remember is that they are safe and effective, as they got approved by the MHRA in the UK, but they are not approved on the NHS. So they are available privately, but not on the NHS. And the effectiveness is there. However, we know that these are just the first generations of drugs, and better, safer, and more effective drugs will come as more are researched. These drugs, lecanemab and donanemab, they are targeting the amyloid buildup in the brain, but we know that there is many other drugs and drug targets that are currently being in trials. So there are drugs that are being repurposed from other conditions that are being tested whether they are beneficial for people living with dementia at the moment. There are also early and some later stage trials into different targets. So drugs that are looking into the tau protein, drugs that are looking at small molecules and biological molecules as well. So these first generation drugs are a defining moment, but they are the first step in the journey towards a treatment for dementia.
And when a big kind of pharma multinational has spent many, many years and many millions or billions of pounds developing these drugs, obviously they want to get some money back. They're not altruistic organizations. Are these drugs incredibly expensive at the moment, and that's why they're currently just kind of in a private and not in the NHS?
So I don't think we got the official figures on how much these drugs are. So if someone is eligible or is looking to access these drugs privately, I would recommend speaking to the healthcare provider or speaking to their private insurance or whoever is their provider to talk about these treatments on a case-by-case basis. But I don't think these figures have been publicly available anywhere.
And do you think there'll ever be a cure? I mean, obviously the treatments we have at the moment kind of can reduce the impact, but in the same way, there've been diseases in the past where all of a sudden someone's come up with something where they're kind of like, this can actually stop the disease. Is that something we're ever going to get, do you think, Martyna, or is it just too complex, too multifaceted a disease?
It is true that dementia is a complex and disease, and that dementia will need a lot more work for us to get to a stage where treatments are available and available at a cheaper and more effective and safer way, and for different types of dementia. But we know that research will beat dementia, and we need to make it a reality sooner. I am hopeful that through more funding, more partnership working, more people taking part in dementia research, we can ensure that people are diagnosed earlier, more accurately, and can access new treatments and new trials and studies coming down the line. Eventually, I would love to see a world where research will have beaten the condition and this disease, and we no longer see the devastation that it causes. We are not at this stage yet, but I'm hopeful that in the future we will be.
And at the weekend, I was at the London Marathon and saw quite a few runners in their Alzheimer's Society T-shirts going along. How much of this might not be something you'd be able to say, or you might not know off the top of your head, but what are the kind of funding streams like for the Alzheimer's Society? Is a lot of it through donations and charity, or do you have a lot of funding coming in from other areas?
We are a charity, so we rely on the generosity of our supporters and our donors in a large scale to fund the research and the services and the work that we are doing. We are non-profit, so all of our efforts go into ending the devastation caused by dementia.
If anyone is listening and they think they might have a relative or they themselves might be affected by Alzheimer's, what would be their first port of call, Martyna?
Please do visit our website. We have, if you are worried about yourself or someone else close to you, then you can check your symptoms today or at any point using the Alzheimer's Society Symptom Checklist. And this can be available on our website at alzheimers.org.uk/checklist. Or you can call the Dementia Support Line, where one of our expert dementia advisors can talk you through your symptoms or your worries, and this can be accessed on calling 0333 150 3456.
And if we've got any young scientists or any budding scientists listen who think this sounds like an area that they might like to get involved in, as someone who's been heavily involved in the research yourself, would you encourage people, and why would you say that people should get involved in Alzheimer's or dementia research?
Definitely. As someone who was a previous academic in this space, I loved this area of research. There's always something to learn and to discover, and this is very promising. And Alzheimer's Society is welcoming every year, grant applications to our project. So please do visit our website. There is a research and for researchers tab on our website. So do get in touch if you have any questions. Our grants team will be able to answer anything. And we have a lot of information for researchers on our website about the support that we offer, the funding that we offer for many different types of research. So please do get in touch.
Just one final question. Dementia Action Week. Can you give us the dates again and just let us know what's happening and how people can get involved if they want to?
Yes. So this year, the Dementia Action Week takes place between the 19th and 25th of May. The theme of the week is diagnosis. So we are encouraging people who are worried about themselves or their loved one to use Alzheimer's Society Dementia Symptom Checklist and seek help. And you could also call our supporter line.
That's brilliant, Martyna. Thank you so much for joining us today. Really appreciate you giving the time and some really valuable insights as well. So thank you very much.
Thank you for having me again. It was great to speak to you.
Thanks to Martyna for taking part in this episode, and thank you so much for listening. I hope you enjoyed the podcast, and remember that this episode can be used as reflective learning for your CPD. Please do keep an eye on the IBMS social media feeds and website for future episodes, and thanks again for listening.